Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we uncover a web of crime that stretches across dinner tables worldwide. It's a tale of power, deception, and greed lurking behind everyday groceries. This is the story of the Mafia's role in food fraud, from olive oil to Parmesan. What happens when the food you trust is part of a criminal empire? How far-reaching is the impact of counterfeit goods that most of us consume unknowingly? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and intricate web of organized crime in the world of food fraud. It started with a routine inspection, a simple test of olive oil purity. But what investigators uncovered went far beyond mislabeled bottles. It was a gateway into a billion-dollar operation, where the Mafia controlled everything from olive orchards to supermarket shelves. In 2020, a routine quality inspection in Milan flagged something unusual about a shipment of extra virgin olive oil. Samples from bottles labeled as premium products didn't meet the stringent standards expected of authentic extra virgin oil. Chemical tests revealed they were a blend of lower-grade oils, cleverly disguised with added coloring and artificial flavors. What initially appeared to be a corporate quality control failure soon unraveled into something far more sinister. Carla Montini, a veteran investigator with Italy's anti-fraud unit, was assigned to the case. Over her 2-decade career, she had seen her fair share of food scandals, mislabeling, expired products repackaged as fresh, and even tainted imports. Yet, as she dug deeper, this case began to feel different. The counterfeit olive oil wasn't just slipping through the cracks of oversight, it was flowing deliberately through carefully designed channels of fraud. And behind those channels, Carla sensed a shadowy presence, one that wasn't just about making money but controlling an entire industry. The trail began with a small exporter in Puglia, a region famous for its olive orchards. Records were sparse, and the company itself seemed to exist on paper more than in reality. The few listed employees couldn't be located, and the registered address led to an abandoned building. Shipments, however, were being moved regularly from Puglia to warehouses in Naples, where the trail went cold. Carla knew Naples well. It was home to some of the most powerful mafia families in the country. But linking these operations to organized crime would require hard evidence, not just suspicion. The deeper Carla looked, the wider the conspiracy seemed to grow. Further inspections revealed that the adulterated olive oil was only the tip of the iceberg. Parmesan cheese stamped with seals of authenticity was found to be fake, containing far cheaper substitutes, mixtatives to mimic the flavor and texture of the real thing. Wines with prestigious regional labels were nothing more than diluted blends of cheap table wine. Even organic produce trusted for its quality and health benefits was being tampered with, sprayed with chemicals despite its certified status. Everywhere Carla turned, the same patterns emerged: companies with unclear ownership, supply chains full of dead ends, and an eerie silence from those who could have provided answers. Small farmers and producers, the ones most affected by this fraud, were either unwilling to talk or had disappeared altogether. Carla's suspicions grew into certainty. This wasn't the work of a few greedy businesses cutting corners. It was a sprawling operation controlled by a sophisticated network with the power to manipulate entire industries. One day, Carla's team received an anonymous tip about a shipment leaving a warehouse in Calabria, another Mafia stronghold. Surveillance footage captured trucks carrying barrels of olive oil being loaded and driven north. When the trucks were intercepted, the barrels were found to contain industrial seed oil, waiting to be processed and sold as premium olive oil. Tracking the shipment's origin revealed a disturbing detail. The warehouse had connections to a shell company linked to Giovanni Russo, a name whispered in Mafia investigations for years but never definitively tied to any crime. Giovanni Russo was known to law enforcement as a man who operated in the shadows. Officially, he ran an agricultural export business that worked with international clients. Unofficially, rumors tied him to money laundering, extortion, and illegal trafficking. Yet, his operations were always too insulated to penetrate. Now, it seemed he had found his way into food fraud, exploiting the trust people placed in the Made in Italy label. Carla felt the pressure mounting. The evidence so far was circumstantial, and without a direct link to Russo or his network, the investigation would stall. Worse, Carla knew from experience how dangerous it was to expose Mafia activities. Whistleblowers often faced threats, and investigators had been known to suffer mysterious accidents. Still, she pressed forward, determined to uncover the full scope of this criminal empire. As the investigation widened, Carla's team discovered the financial records of several small farms in southern Italy that had recently gone bankrupt. Interviews with their owners painted a chilling picture. Many had been approached by intermediaries offering suspiciously high prices for their crops, only to face ruin when they refused. One farmer spoke of a fire that swept through his orchard days after turning down an offer. Another described trucks parked outside his property, their drivers watching silently for hours. Carla pieced together the pattern. The Mafia wasn't just counterfeiting food, it was controlling the production process from the ground up. Farmers were being coerced into selling their crops to intermediaries under Russo's control, while those who resisted were driven out of business or worse. The counterfeit products were then funneled into legitimate supply chains, blending seamlessly with genuine goods. It was a scheme of staggering complexity, and it was working. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, Carla felt the enormity of the operation bearing down on her. The Mafia wasn't just profiting from food fraud, it was creating a monopoly over some of the most iconic staples of Italian cuisine. This wasn't just an attack on consumers, it was an assault on culture and tradition, a calculated exploitation of trust. And yet, even as Carla uncovered more evidence, she knew the most dangerous part of the investigation was still to come. Carla Montini's investigation into the counterfeit olive oil led her directly into the shadows of Giovanni Russo's empire. From the outside, Russo appeared to be a legitimate businessman, running a lucrative agricultural export company that boasted clients across Europe, North America, and even Asia. His reputation as a savvy entrepreneur allowed him to keep a low profile, avoiding the scrutiny often directed at Mafia figures. Yet, as Carla's team peeled back the layers of his operations, the scale of his deception became startlingly clear. Russo's counterfeit olive oil wasn't just a local scam, it was a global enterprise. Authentic extra virgin olive oil is a time-consuming and expensive product to produce, but Russo had found a way to bypass those challenges entirely. He imported low-quality industrial seed oils from overseas, doctored them with synthetic dyes, and added chemicals to replicate the aroma and taste of authentic olive oil. His factories, scattered across remote locations in southern Italy, operated under the radar, with forged documentation and fake certifications to back their legitimacy. But olive oil was only the beginning. Carla discovered that Russo had expanded his reach into one of Italy's most protected culinary treasures, Parmesan cheese. Known as the king of cheesies, Parmesan is revered worldwide and subject to strict regulations to ensure its authenticity. Genuine Parmesan is aged for at least 12 months, with its unique flavor profile derived from the meticulous care taken during production. Russo, however, had no patience for such processes. His counterfeit Parmesan was churned out in makeshift factories, where substandard dairy products were mixed with additives to mimic the texture and taste of the real thing. These imitations were then stamped with counterfeit seals of authenticity, fooling even the most discerning consumers. Through wiretaps and undercover surveillance, Carla's team began piecing together the operation. Russo's influence extended far beyond the factories themselves. He had infiltrated regional certification boards, bribing inspectors to issue false authenticity labels. He paid off transportation companies to move his counterfeit goods through legitimate supply chains, ensuring they reached markets and stores undetected. The logistics were staggering in their complexity, but they ran with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Even more shocking was the level of violence used to maintain control. Farmers who refused to sell their crops to Russo's intermediaries often found themselves targeted. Vineyards producing high-quality grapes for wine were pressured into selling at below market rates or risked having their crops destroyed. A handful of courageous farmers had attempted to go to the authorities but were quickly silenced through threats or sabotage. One small dairy farm that refused to supply milk for Russo's counterfeit Parmesan mysteriously burned to the ground. Fear became an invisible force, binding entire communities to Russo's will. Carla knew that exposing the full extent of Russo's empire would require more than following the money. Her team began mapping the labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and forged documents that Russo used to obscure his activities. They uncovered shipping manifests detailing the movement of counterfeit products from Italian ports to distributors in Germany, the United States, and even Japan. With every piece of evidence, the scope of the operation grew more staggering. What had begun as a regional fraud now appeared to be a billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Despite the progress, the investigation was fraught with obstacles. Some evidence went missing before Carla's team could seize it. Witnesses who initially agreed to cooperate suddenly backed out without explanation. Carla suspected that Russo had eyes and ears everywhere, monitoring the investigation and neutralizing threats before they could reach him. Every lead came with a sense of urgency, knowing that one misstep could jeopardize the entire case. Amid the mounting tension, a breakthrough emerged. A financial analyst on Carla's team uncovered a series of unusually large transactions linked to Russo's agricultural export company. These payments, routed through obscure accounts in tax havens, corresponded to shipments of raw materials like milk and seed oils. The timing and quantities of the shipments aligned perfectly with the distribution of counterfeit products. It was the first tangible link between Russo's seemingly legitimate business and his illicit operations. Carla's team launched a raid on one of Russo's warehouses, located on the outskirts of Naples. Inside, they found a treasure trove of counterfeit goods, pallets of fake Parmesan, barrels of adulterated olive oil, and stacks of falsified certification labels. The raid was a significant blow to Russo's operation, but it wasn't enough. Carla knew that seizing the products was only a temporary setback for someone as powerful and resourceful as Giovanni Russo. To truly dismantle his empire, they would need to go after the man himself. As Carla analyzed the evidence from the warehouse, she noticed a peculiar detail. A shipment of counterfeit olive oil had been scheduled to leave for New York the following week, with documentation signed by one of Russo's most trusted lieutenants. This gave her team a critical lead, but it also raised the stakes. If Russo realized the authorities were closing in on him, there was no telling how he might retaliate. Carla knew they were walking a tightrope, and one wrong move could put everything and everyone in danger. As Carla Montini's investigation gained traction, the human cost of Giovanni Russo's empire became tragically clear. The counterfeit goods flooding international markets were not just a betrayal of trust, they had devastating effects on the very people who upheld the traditions and authenticity of Italian food. Small-scale farmers, cheesemakers, and olive growers, those who took pride in their craft, were the silent victims of a system designed to erase them. Livio Santini was one such farmer. For generations, his family had cultivated olive trees on a small estate in Puglia, producing some of the finest oil in the region. But over the past few years, Livio had struggled to compete. Prices for authentic olive oil had plummeted as counterfeit products flooded the market, undercutting legitimate producers. When intermediaries tied to Russo's network approached him with an offer to sell his entire harvest, Livio refused. He knew what it meant to lose control of his product, his legacy. Days later, a fire ripped through his orchard, destroying decades-old trees. Though Livio suspected the perpetrators, he knew better than to speak out. In Puglia, whispers about Mafia involvement were enough to silence most complaints. Livio's story wasn't unique. Carla's team uncovered similar accounts across Italy. Dairy farmers who supplied milk for authentic Parmesan were forced to sell at impossibly low prices or risk retaliation. Vineyards known for producing fine wines were pressured into selling their grapes to distributors, who diluted them with inferior blends. Some of these farmers had gone bankrupt, their businesses crushed by the relentless squeeze of Mafia-controlled intermediaries. For others, the consequences were more sinister: burned fields, sabotaged equipment, and veiled threats that kept entire communities in fear. As the investigation widened, Carla began to see the scale of Russo's reach. His counterfeit Parmesan wasn't just undercutting the competition, it was replacing it entirely in some markets. Cheese factories in Emilia-Romagna that adhered to the rigorous standards of authentic Parmesan production faced declining sales as counterfeit products, indistinguishable to most consumers, flooded store shelves. The same was true for wine producers in Tuscany and olive oil makers in Sicily. Russo's empire wasn't just profiting from fraud, it was systematically dismantling the foundations of Italy's agricultural economy. Beyond Italy, the ripple effects were even more insidious. The counterfeit olive oil, cheese, and wine found their way into high-end grocery stores, restaurants, and import markets worldwide. Consumers who thought they were purchasing the finest Italian products were unknowingly consuming substandard imitations. Some of the counterfeit goods contained harmful additives, raising serious health concerns. Carla's team discovered that batches of adulterated olive oil had been linked to allergic reactions and gastrointestinal illnesses in several countries. Despite the clear risks, the products kept flowing, hidden by layers of forged documents and false certifications. One of the most alarming discoveries came from a whistleblower within a certification agency. The man, who remained anonymous for fear of retaliation, revealed how Russo's network had infiltrated regulatory bodies. Inspectors tasked with verifying the authenticity of Parmesan, olive oil, and wine were either bribed or coerced into signing off on counterfeit products. Carla was horrified by the extent of the corruption. Russo had effectively hijacked the very systems designed to protect consumers, turning them into tools for his operation. The informant's testimony led Carla's team to uncover a network of secret factories where the counterfeit goods were produced. These facilities were hidden in remote areas, often disguised as legitimate businesses. One such factory, located in an abandoned industrial park outside Naples, was raided by Carla's team. Inside, they found hundreds of wheels of fake Parmesan, stacked like trophies. Barrels of industrial seed oil sat next to machines used to blend and bottle the product as extra virgin olive oil. Each item bore fraudulent labels and certifications, ready to be shipped to unsuspecting markets. Despite these successes, Carla felt the weight of the investigation bearing down on her. Each raid disrupted Russo's supply chain, but the man himself remained elusive. Witnesses were reluctant to come forward, fearing for their safety. Those who did speak up often changed their minds after receiving anonymous threats. Even Carla's team wasn't immune. Several investigators reported being followed, their personal information leaked online in an apparent attempt to intimidate them. Then came the news Carla had dreaded. A young farmer who had agreed to testify against Russo was found dead in what appeared to be a tragic accident. But to Carla, the timing was no coincidence. The message was clear: Russo would go to any lengths to protect his empire. Despite the mounting risks, Carla knew she couldn't stop. Each new piece of evidence, each brave testimony, brought them closer to the truth. But the closer they got, the more dangerous the investigation became. With Russo still at large and his network tightening its grip on the food industry, Carla understood that the fight was far from over. And as she prepared for the next phase of the case, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Mafia's retaliation had only just begun. As Carla Montini dug deeper into Giovanni Russo's sprawling criminal empire, it became increasingly clear that his operations were not only affecting the food industry, but were intricately woven into the fabric of Italy's economy. The counterfeit olive oil, Parmesan, and wine were just part of the picture. Russo's Mafia-controlled network had infiltrated every level of the supply chain, from small family farms to high-end export companies, and even the very regulators meant to safeguard Italy's culinary heritage. One of the most shocking revelations came when Carla's team uncovered evidence of a money laundering operation hidden behind the counterfeit food trade. Russo was using the profits from his fake goods to fund a network of legitimate businesses that allowed him to clean his illicit earnings. From luxury real estate in Milan to high-end restaurants in Rome, Russo had established a portfolio that appeared legitimate on the surface but was funded by the proceeds of his fraudulent operation. These investments, spread across Italy and beyond, served as both a financial cushion and a means to launder the massive sums flowing through his network. The money came in from one channel through fake olive oil shipments, counterfeit Parmesan cheese, and tainted wine, and was dispersed through others, shell companies, offshore accounts, and corrupt banks. Carla's team discovered a list of individuals connected to Russo's legitimate enterprises. At first glance, many were high-profile figures, investors, well-known restaurateurs, and wealthy real estate moguls seemingly untouchable. These figures were complicit in laundering the profits from the Mafia's food fraud scheme, either knowingly or unknowingly, and their connections to Russo were growing more disturbing by the day. Carla knew that in order to bring down the operation, she needed to connect the dots between Russo and the powerful people who had helped shield him from scrutiny. Her team's investigation into these links led them to an unexpected breakthrough, a series of intercepted phone calls between Russo and several influential politicians. The conversations were coded, but there was no mistaking the significance of their content. The politicians had been involved in pushing legislation that favored companies with ties to Russo's network, all while ignoring growing evidence of fraud within the food industry. In exchange for their support, Russo had been funneling money into their campaigns, helping to secure their positions in local and national governments. It wasn't just about food fraud anymore, it was about corruption at the highest levels of power. The revelations sent shockwaves through the investigation. The realization that powerful figures were involved not only made the case more dangerous, but also complicated matters significantly. It was no longer just a question of gathering evidence. Now Carla had to contend with the very people who had the power to block her every move. One of the politicians linked to Russo's network, Senator Paolo Bellini, was particularly troublesome. His influence in Rome was vast, and Carla's team quickly realized that Bellini was actively working behind the scenes to delay or derail any efforts to investigate Russo further. It was clear that the deeper Carla went, the more formidable the forces against her became. Carla's resolve only hardened. She knew that going after Russo and his political allies was a monumental task, one that required a level of strategy and precision that she had never before encountered in her career. As her team continued to track the movement of counterfeit goods, they learned that one of Russo's major shipments was scheduled to leave Naples for the United States. If they could intercept this shipment, it would not only deal a significant blow to Russo's operation, but also provide critical evidence that could help them dismantle his empire. The pressure mounted. Carla knew that if they missed this opportunity, it could be months before they would have another chance to strike. The night before the scheduled interception, Carla's team conducted a final sweep of the warehouse in Naples where the shipment was being prepared. Inside, they found crates of fake Parmesan, barrels of counterfeit olive oil, and hundreds of bottles of low-quality wine labeled as prestigious Italian brands. The goods were carefully concealed in containers, hidden under layers of legitimate products. The sheer scale of the operation left Carla speechless. This was the kind of shipment that could make Russo millions of euros. Yet even as her team prepared to make their move, they received a chilling message. The shipment had been moved to a different location. Someone had tipped off Russo, and the goods were already on the move. In that moment, Carla felt the weight of the investigation press down on her. It was one step forward, two steps back. The feeling that they were always just one step behind Russo and his network was disheartening, but Carla was determined not to give up. She couldn't afford to lose this battle. Too much was at stake, not just for her career, but for the many farmers, producers, and consumers who had been hurt by Russo's crimes. The failure to intercept the shipment was a setback, but it wasn't the end. Carla knew that the war was far from over. They now had to find a new way to strike at Russo's network, and she was determined to use the information they had gathered to expose the corrupt politicians, businessmen, and criminal masterminds who had enabled him. Russo had built a near impenetrable fortress around his empire, but Carla wasn't going to let that stop her. With every new lead, she could feel the walls closing in on him. It was only a matter of time before his world began to unravel, and she would be there to make sure of it. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became, and Carla couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The investigation into Giovanni Russo's empire had reached its breaking point. Every effort to bring down the operation seemed to be thwarted by an invisible force, whether it was the tip-offs to Russo, the corruption that ran deep within Italy's political system, or the Mafia's brutal tactics to silence anyone who dared to get too close. Carla Montini and her team had faced countless obstacles, but they had come too far to back down now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the truth was within reach. It was the discovery of a hidden ledger that finally provided the breakthrough Carla had been waiting for. The ledger, uncovered during a raid on one of Russo's storage warehouses, contained a detailed list of transactions, names, and locations tied directly to the network of businesses and individuals who had helped Russo launder the proceeds from his food fraud operation. The ledger was a veritable roadmap of corruption, and it connected the dots between the counterfeit food products and the politicians, bankers, and business leaders who had enabled them. Among the entries, Carla found the name of Paolo Bellini, the influential senator who had repeatedly blocked attempts to investigate Russo. Bellini's involvement went deeper than anyone had anticipated. Not only had he been receiving campaign donations from Russo's associates, but he had also been funneling money from the counterfeit food trade into offshore accounts. The evidence was irrefutable, and it was the key to bringing the entire operation down. But even as Carla pieced together the puzzle, she realized that arresting Bellini and exposing his corruption wouldn't be enough. Russo's network stretched far beyond what they had initially understood. His tentacles reached into every corner of the Italian economy and beyond, and even more chilling, it appeared that Russo had prepared for this moment. Carla's team continued to track the flow of goods, hoping to intercept the last major shipment of counterfeit products before it left Italy. But just as they were closing in, disaster struck. A key informant, a truck driver who had been providing them with crucial intel on the shipment routes, was found dead under suspicious circumstances. The man had been a low-level associate in Russo's operation, but his death sent a chilling message to Carla and her team. They were dealing with an organization that would stop at nothing to protect its interests. Despite the loss of their informant, Carla and her team pushed forward. They had no choice. They knew that the network was becoming more desperate, and if they didn't act quickly, Russo and his associates would find ways to disappear into the shadows, slipping beyond the reach of the law once again. The next few days were tense as they followed the lead on the shipment, which was now slated to leave the port of Genoa. Time was running out. As they prepared to raid the port, Carla received an unexpected call. It was an anonymous tip-off, one that gave them a crucial detail: Russo had planned to leave the country. The call came from an untraceable number, but it was clear the person on the other end knew what was happening inside Russo's operation. The information was too specific to ignore. Russo was preparing to flee with his ill-gotten gains, and he had a plane waiting in a private hangar just outside of Rome. Carla quickly adjusted her strategy, redirecting her team to intercept Russo at the private airstrip. This was their last chance to capture him before he vanished into the wind. They mobilized quickly, coordinating with local law enforcement and air traffic control to track Russo's movements. As they neared the airstrip, Carla could feel the tension rise. If they were too late, Russo would slip through their fingers for good. The private hangar was heavily guarded, and it was clear that Russo's associates were prepared for a confrontation. Carla and her team moved in quickly and quietly, surrounding the area. In a dramatic twist, the team stumbled upon a surprise. Russo was not alone. Several of his top lieutenants, including one of his most trusted enforcers, were there with him, preparing for a swift escape. But just as they closed in, a series of gunshots rang out. A chaotic firefight erupted, and despite the team's preparation, they found themselves caught in the middle of a violent standoff. It was clear that Russo's men were willing to fight to the death to protect their boss and their empire. Carla's heart raced as the situation spiraled out of control. In the confusion, Russo managed to slip away, vanishing into the dense fog that rolled in from the surrounding countryside. With Russo gone, the investigation seemed to hit a dead end. Carla stood in the midst of the chaos, feeling the weight of defeat wash over her. But even in the face of failure, she knew one thing for certain: Russo's empire, built on deception, greed, and fear, would not stand forever. The investigation had already exposed cracks in his operations, his corrupt allies, his money-laundering networks, and the immense web of deception that spanned the globe. They may have lost the battle for now, but the war was far from over. In the days that followed, Carla and her team pieced together their evidence. They knew that Russo would eventually be caught. His empire had been exposed for what it truly was, and no amount of power or money could protect him forever. As the investigation moved forward, Carla couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before Giovanni Russo and his criminal network would be brought to justice. But for now, the question remained: how much longer could they keep the pressure on before Russo disappeared for good? The answers, Carla knew, were buried somewhere in the twisted underworld he had created, and it was up to her to uncover them before it was too late. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the murky underworld of food fraud. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to uncover more chilling tales with mystery minds. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.